Thank you so much, Teresa. So again, welcome tonight to the 52nd Avenue Feasibility. All right, I think we've got it now, folks. Welcome to the City and County of Denver's 52nd Avenue Feasibility Study community meeting here. My name is Andy Mountain. I'll be facilitating the dialogue tonight. A few sort of rules of the road as we work through the agenda and work through the meeting. We'll start with a project overview and a summary of community input received. We'll then walk through the 3 focus areas that we're looking at, alternatives that are being considered for those areas. And then we'll move into sort of some of the evaluation criteria and results that we've seen before moving into sort of a discussion on short-term connectivity options. I would encourage each of you, as you have questions that pop into your mind throughout the presentation, please get those in the chat feature through Zoom. We'll have moments sort of throughout where we'll pull in a question or two just to make sure that we're getting your voices as part of this dialogue throughout the evening. So that's going to be the flow for the night. We have a few polls that we'll walk through, and those will come up as we get through the through the presentation here. You'll be hearing from a few of us here this evening. Karen Good, who is the project manager with the City and County of Denver. Karen will be leading things out. You'll also be hearing from Leah Langerman on the community input that we've received so far. Matt Buster will walk you through the areas that we're looking at, the alternatives that are being considered, and Kara Swanson will be walking through the evaluation criteria as well as the results of how that screening looked. We do have our interpreter Teresa on the Spanish line, as well as Michelle Betancourt, who's helping manage Spanish chat with us as well. So our hope is that we can make sure that we've got equal and thorough participation from all involved. So I appreciate you all joining us tonight. Karen, let me throw it over to you to walk through a project overview. Oh, you're muted, Karen.
Thanks so much, Andy. Wouldn't be a meeting without, talking with mute on. It's great. So thanks everyone again for being here tonight. Just wanted to, hopefully many of you are familiar with the project itself and the project boundaries, but we're really looking at feasibility of connecting 52nd between Brighton and Colorado Boulevard. In that larger area, and somebody is not on mute like I was when I started. If you could be on mute so that everyone can hear. And in addition to 52nd, we're also looking at the York Brighton underpass and connectivity throughout this area, really bound by Brighton, Colorado, the Denver boundary to the north and 70 to the south, the connectivity to the N-Line station at National Western Center. So that's sort of the bubble that we're working in, but we know that access to destinations in this area, the Valeria and Swansea is challenging. So if folks have concerns outside of the area that we're talking about, please do feel free to reach out and contact me directly. My contact information is on the website. It's at the end of the presentation, and a lot of you already have my contact information. So feel free to use that and we'll go from there. Big picture is that we are evaluating, as I said, that feasibility of 52nd and identifying short-term and longer-term priorities that we can, so that we can look at doing some things maybe sooner than later, maybe some smaller projects sooner, and understand what the priorities of the community are for things that are going to take a little bit longer or a lot bit longer. And again, how are we looking at all of this? We're analyzing the actual data. We are getting community input from you all, from others, and we are putting that together and balancing all the pieces and parts out and understanding the engineering and technical feasibility for different connections and alternatives and alignments. So that is big picture of what we're doing. And we're going to zoom in a little bit to talk through the focus areas. And Matt Buster is going to talk about this a little bit more, but focus area 1, that's identifying that 52nd corridor and the different alternatives in that area. Focus area 2, that's that fabulous and wonderful Brighton and York underpass that if you have walked under, it's incredibly uncomfortable if you've walked or biked there. And if you are driving a semi through there, it is highly likely that you may have hit the top of the underpass because it is rather low. If there is snow or something on the road that elevates the road surface, that means that a semi might not be making it under that underpass very comfortably. So that's focus area 2. And then focus area 3, the box kind of shows the area by the end line station, but it's really the whole Elyria and Swansea neighborhoods and the sidewalk connectivity to the end line station, sidewalk and bike connectivity, and thinking about that in a big picture. So we'll get to that later in the presentation, but just wanted to give you a high-level overview of the bubble that we're working in. And with that, I am going to pass the mic to Leah, and she's going to talk a little bit about the input that we've received to date so that you know what we've heard and what we haven't heard, so that you can add what we haven't heard and help emphasize things that are really important to you. So thanks again.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so as far as community engagement goes, as a first step back in August of 2020, we formed a community working group. And this has representatives from the neighborhood groups, advocacy organizations, and businesses in the area. And at first, this group was split into 2, but we quickly realized that it was a benefit to combine the groups and have everybody talking together. So then we had these community working groups as a cohesive group meet each time we were about to reach out to the general community. So the working group has been giving us input regarding our outreach approach, and also they've given us a lot of detailed comments about their preference for improvements. The second thing listed there is the survey that we did in late October, and that's how we kicked off the community outreach. And this was a survey about existing travel patterns and the improvements that people would like to see. And that helped set the stage for our alternatives development. Also, we had our first virtual community meeting that many of you were at back in November. And that's where we introduced the options for the roadway alignments and different street elements. And we're now back here today for the second community meeting to share the results of the alternatives development and evaluation, and to find out which improvements you would like to come first. So here are some results from that survey that I was mentioning. We heard a few key things really, and we asked what transportation improvements are most important to you. And the percentages that you see listed there towards the bottom reflect how many participants voted for that option. This was multiple choice, so they don't add up to 100%. But with only a slight variation in a few responses, really those completing the survey told us that travel by bicycle and on foot is just as important as travel in vehicles in this area. And then on that same survey, we also asked which gaps in connectivity are most important to fill. And that's shown on the next slide. And connecting to the east of Colorado Boulevard and connecting bike facilities they were seen as the most important. The Brighton York underpass of the railroad was also important, and just slightly more so than connecting 52nd Avenue across the railroad to Brighton Boulevard. So overall, out of the full survey and all those community meetings that I listed before, a few comment themes kept popping up. So we confirmed that people want connectivity in all directions, and really also would like improvements at the Brighton York underpass and along 52nd. The pedestrian and bicycle accommodations are really important. And if we added bike lanes, two-way, continuous throughout the corridor is important. And also people would like better access to transit. We definitely have heard concerns about the impacts that these improvements could have to the long-standing businesses and affordable housing in the area, and the need for improving safety for all the modes of travel. We know that there's a lot of freight traffic in the area, and making sure that everybody can travel and and coexist safely. And then also to mitigate the existing drainage issues with the improvements to the extent that we can. The neighborhood experiences a lot of drainage problems, and there's the hope that some of that could be improved. So now I'll hand this over to Matt, and he can go over the study's focus areas and the improvement alternatives.
Good evening, everyone. This will just be a refresher from what we've covered previously. Karen covered the focus areas in a high level, and we're going to dive down and just refresh you all on what is included within each of the three focus areas. Focus area 1 is primarily the 52nd Avenue corridor from Brighton Boulevard to Colorado Boulevard. When we met before, we went through 4 alternatives with you. The first alternative, which we call alternative 1 throughout this presentation, is essentially looking at making neighborhood scale pedestrian and bicycle improvements along 52nd Avenue from Milwaukee, or essentially immediately east of the Union Pacific Railroad, to Colorado Boulevard. It also would make some pedestrian bicycle improvements just immediately on the west side of the Union Pacific Railroad between Columbine and Thompson. And also it would consider adding an additional pedestrian bicycle bridge. It would not be a vehicular bridge, but it would be pedestrian and bicycle, similar to the new bridge that has been installed at 47th Avenue. The second alternative that we discussed was a multimodal vehicular, freight, bicycle, and pedestrian improvements along the entirety of 52nd Avenue from Brighton to Colorado Boulevard. And that we discussed both a bridge and an underpass beneath the Union Pacific Railroad in the middle there. And then alternative 3 was shifting the primary multimodal corridor to the north, with the idea of pushing the larger traffic volumes for vehicular and freight traffic northerly, north of the existing residential communities. Option 3 also evaluated similarly a bridge or an underpass at the Union Pacific rail crossing. And then a new alternative that we have come up with after hearing everyone's input from our last meeting is alternative 4. And alternative 4 essentially would be making curb, gutter, sidewalk improvements along 52nd Avenue in the area designated in purple there, which again is a similar alignment to alignment number 1. The real difference between alignment 1 and alignment 4 is the pedestrian bicycle bridge that is proposed in alternative 1 would not be a component of alternative 4. So each of these alternatives, we're beginning to look at phasing and how we might be able to implement pieces of these alternatives, with there being a high dollar investment in the infrastructure itself. Part of this study is allowing us to discover how we may phase or implement certain portions of these improvements, and then over time put together the whole piece of the puzzle. We also met separately since we last talked with CDOT and discussed what possibilities there might be for a new interchange at Colorado Boulevard. And the conversation was a bit of surprise reaction from CDOT. They did not say it would not be possible to construct a new interchange, but they said that it would be extremely difficult and extremely costly as a result of the grade separation going both over Vasquez and over Colorado. Each of those would require their own separate ramp system down to both Vasquez and Colorado, and would be quite costly and would take a substantial amount of time to find that revenue. But anyway, that's just the reaction that we received from CDOT. So with that, we did some polling, and between the three alternatives, let me go back a slide, that we reviewed last time, alternative 1, 2, and 3, 4 being new, so we do not have polling results. But alternative 1 and alternative 2 scored identically with 33% favoring alternative 1 and 33% favoring alternative 2. And alternative 3 fell just shortly behind with 27% of the vote. So you can see there's a very similar split interest in these different alternatives. We also asked a polling question related to the preference on an underpass or an overpass. If you recall from our last conversations, the underpass has several challenges, primarily related to stormwater and drainage falling into the sump of an underpass, and that elevation would be below the elevation of the South Platte River and would require substantial and complicated pumping systems to move stormwater from the underpass to the river. Other disadvantages with the underpass were that the railroad tracks would require temporary relocations that would cause additional impacts to the adjacent property owners. On the flip side, the overpass was preferred by the majority as a result of the reduced impacts. There would need to be very little rail relocation, and the stormwater issues essentially would not be concerning with the overpass option. Focus area 2, essentially, as Karen mentioned, is that constrained intersection underpass beneath the BNSF railroad. That underpass also travels beneath the RTD N line, but today it is a very substandard vertical clearance, as well as a horizontal sight distance that makes an extremely dangerous turning movement from Brighton to York Street. And we asked, how important improving that poor condition, unsafe condition today is, and 78% of the people felt that not only is the condition needing improvement, but that they would also like to see, in addition to vehicular, pedestrian and bicycle improvements in that underpass with future improvements. So ideas for that underpass, this image kind of portrays some of these major elements, but would be accommodating bikes and pedestrians, increased lighting, increased airspace and aesthetics, wider vehicular travel, and just an overall more safe feeling underpass condition.
So Matt, that looks almost exactly like the existing condition, right?
Not hardly.
So I just, wanted to remind folks that we know that it doesn't look anything like this now, but we really, thanks Matt, want to make sure you know that we're thinking about a big vision. So some of these things are a big leap, but we all deserve a big leap sometimes. So I just wanted to give y'all we know we're looking big picture, and we're looking at going from really not, it's not good from good to great. It's from really not good at all to great. So sorry, Matt.
Good point, Karen. And then the third focus area is the area that Karen mentioned by the N line station at the National Western Center, in making primarily focusing on neighborhood scale improvements, both pedestrian and bicycle improvements along the 47th, 48th, and 49th corridors. And we did some polling in our last meeting with you all, and 42% of you would prefer better pedestrian improvements, 8% would prefer better bike facilities, and a combined 50% or the other half of you would like both of those improvements. So those are important improvements for the community. And with that, I think we'd like to open it up At this time, let Andy take over for some questions and discussion.
Thank you, Matt. And again, just to wrap up here, what Matt went through, 4 options as it relates to 52nd. One key factor I would point out is that 4th option that was generated based off of the community feedback. So the idea of bicycle and pedestrian improvements along 52nd, but without the pedestrian connection over the rail. That could be a phase 1, and then the other options could build on top of that. So you do have sort of some synergy between the options. They don't need to be entirely independent. And so here, what we wanted to do is take just a couple of clarifying questions before Kara begins to dive into the evaluation. So those of you on the line, if you open the participants box on the bottom of your screen, you'll see at the bottom of that new window is a button that says raise hand. You can press that and a little hand will come up next to you. But John Reiki, I see you in chat already, so I'm gonna call on you first if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if the new planned lane on 52nd would connect to any complementary bicycle infrastructure or any new places to go, or whether it would just be like a line on a map that's only 6 blocks long or whatever.
John, that's a great question. And we do have some bond bike improvements in GES that are coming up shortly, including Clayton and 49th. So that is coming soon to a virtual meeting by you, I think in the summer timeline, to look at that complementary network. And those are part of the bond program, the Elevate Denver bond program. So it would not be just a line on a map that doesn't connect to a grid. And obviously we do have the park right there. So there are destinations, but that's something that we would want to make sure that we are not just dumping people off like, oh, you're here. And it does correspond also with the the bus network. So folks that might be biking to the bus to get to a further away destination. So there are some pieces and parts that we're working on tying that all together. Does that help answer your question?
Excellent. All good news. Thank you.
Awesome. And please do stay tuned on that, because we will have some more conversations on Clayton and 49th coming up soon.
Excellent. Amber Stoffels, I see you're on the line here. I think sort of in the chat. Can I tempt you onto the audio here to join us real quick, just to make sure folks can hear what your ideas were?
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I work for BNSF Railway, Amber Stoffels, manager of public projects. I cover multiple states in Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. But I'm glad to see Denver considering improvements at the Brighton York Street underpass. This is something that BNSF has experienced a lot of bridge hits, and I'm sure the general public would like to see improvements here as well. So I just wanted to comment that BNSF is looking forward to working with Denver on that component of the project.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Amber. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would say we would be really excited for that too. We've been working collaboratively with Adams County and Commerce City on this project and others. And I think that's really exciting. So hopefully that will be an opportunity for additional conversations and public input to get some funding and move that forward, along with lots of other things.
Great. So I'm not seeing any more hands in the participants box here. So why don't we keep things moving? What I want to do is flip it to Kara Swanson. And again, what Kara's going to walk through is what criteria were used to evaluate everything that Matt just explained. And then what the results of that evaluation look like. And then following that, we'll be looking for some feedback from you all on your preferences and priorities based on this new intelligence. Kara?
Thanks, Andy. So as Matt just went through the 4 different alignments, that's really what we focused our evaluation on. We also wanted to take a look at using different criteria, looking at an overpass or an underpass for those alternatives that did have a road that would cross the railroad. So we kept the alternatives evaluation really focused on those alignment options, rather than, I know at the first public meeting we talked about different widths of bike lanes and sidewalks. So we focused on the alignment options, primarily because the bike and sidewalk and all of those other options can really be implemented with any of the alignment options, but really wanted to focus in looking at the different types of impacts and all of that, focused on those alignments and the overpass or underpass for the railroad. So we considered community input. I'll mention that a little bit more later in the presentation. Also looked from an engineering standpoint, using technical expertise from our designers, and looking at engineering constraints. So looking at constraints with the railroad, looking at things like utilities and drainage and those types of things as well. So the evaluation criteria was really developed using a combination of public input from the last meeting and survey, and from engineering criteria that I just mentioned on the previous slide. We divided the evaluation criteria into 3 different categories. So we had multimodal travel. We looked at pedestrian and bicycle safety, connections to both local and regional trails and roads, and transit connections and the ability to provide additional transit routes in the future as well. We also looked at, the second category was community and environment. So again, this took into account community support. So from a multitude of places, through the survey, through polling in the meetings, and additional conversations that have been had with the community. We looked at high-level property and park impacts, noise, visual, and potential hazardous material impacts, which really came into play with the overpass versus underpass. We looked at freight connectivity, so trucking connectivity, and drainage challenges, again, which really comes into play with looking at the overpass or underpass options. And then we had an other category, which looked at the cost, maintenance, how much maintenance does each alignment alternative require, and coordination with other agencies. So the railroads, Adams County, Commerce City, looking at, how much coordination would those alignment options require. So again, these are the alignment alternatives that we did the in-depth evaluation of, that Matt just walked through. So that's the context for the next slide with the table that we'll be discussing. So this is our smiley face table, and this was the easiest way, I think, to compare the alternatives to each other and a way to portray those results. And so this is a high-level summary of the results of the alignment evaluation. So we actually had a lot more criteria that kind of went into more detail about these, but we wanted to summarize them on one slide. So it's really important to note that the alternatives were compared to each other for each category. They weren't compared to, doing nothing or existing conditions. They were compared to one another. So I'll walk through each criterion shown on the screen here, and kind of describe how the alternatives rated against each other on that. So for the first one, for community support, because I think, as Matt mentioned, based on community feedback and poll results, there was a desire expressed for some sort of connection across the railroad, which is why all 3 of those ended up with a green rating, and then not providing a connection across the railroad ended up, compared to the others, with a poor rating, because from what we have heard from the community, there is a desire to cross the railroad. For pedestrian and bicycle comfort and safety, looking at having a bike and ped only crossing across the railroad eliminates, the travel next to vehicles such as freight trucks and just passenger vehicles. So you have that kind of dedicated crossing of the railroad. For alternative 2 and 3, we had those rated slightly lower because you would have potentially bicycles and pedestrians closer to higher volumes of traffic. Same with alternative 4, also gave that a green rating because you wouldn't have that extra vehicular connection across the railroads. For multimodal connectivity, again, providing some sort of crossing, whether it's bicycle or pedestrian or a new road on the 52nd alignment, really helps to kind of tie in both local and regional multimodal connectivity to existing multimodal features or other roadways that people are trying to get to. Again, having alternative 4 not having any connection at all doesn't really provide that multimodal connectivity for any mode of transportation. For freight travel patterns, we had alternatives 1 and 4 rated the worst on that because it does not provide that vehicular connectivity across the railroad. And having the new road connection along the existing 52nd alignment rated the best because we do have existing freight travel patterns there, and there would be less turning and maneuvering for trucks that would happen with the northern alignment. For property and park impacts, we had the worst rated ones being that new roadway across the railroad because it would require a larger footprint for that crossing as compared to the other alternatives as well. And it was pretty uniform for the next several categories. Looking at environmental impacts, you have the 2 new roadway alignments across the railroad faring worse than the other ones in terms of visual impacts, the potential for hazardous material or drainage challenges, because you would have more area disturbed during construction and a wider footprint there. For noise impacts, again, the same rating. When you have a new roadway, whether it's by residents or businesses, you're going to have increased noise from the increased traffic along there. Not providing any connection across the railroad with alternative 4, you'll have existing noise that is out there now, but it won't be increasing that at all. And again, the same results for cost and maintenance requirements. The most expensive alternatives and the 2 requiring the most maintenance are alternatives 2 and 3, which is that new road connection across the railroad. And I guess the most affordable alternative would be that no connection across the railroad. But because you do have sidewalk and bicycle improvements for all the alternatives, but since you're not crossing the railroad, you have the savings in overall cost and maintenance requirements from that. And so while I don't have the overpass or underpass here, the results of that shown, it was pretty uniform across the board for the overpass faring better almost for all of these categories, because when you start looking at excavation and disturbance areas, especially when you're getting into hazardous materials and drainage and bicycle and pedestrian comfort, looking at an overpass versus an underpass, the overpass fared much better than the underpass did on that. So the evaluation considered all travelers and impacts and benefits to residents, businesses, regional traffic. But we have had a lot of questions about how this will benefit or impact the residents of this neighborhood. So the next few slides really highlight some of the largest considerations. The pros and cons listed on each slide that I'll walk through are in relation to the other alternatives. So as I'm talking through each alternative, the impacts or benefits are how the alternative compares to the others. And this is, again, really summarizing what I just showed you on the big matrix, but breaking it down by alternative and how it would benefit or impact the residential neighborhood there. So looking at alternative 1, really the pros of this alternative, which is providing that bicycle and pedestrian crossing across the railroad. It provides that connectivity that we heard from residents that's desired out there. There is more pedestrian and bicycle comfort than the roadway connection alternatives. As I mentioned before, you don't have bike and peds directly adjacent to heavier traffic volumes with this alternative. There is less residential property impacts than alternative 2. Alternative 2 is the one that would be a new roadway that connects 52nd. And that's because you wouldn't have the larger footprint necessarily of creating a new roadway crossing. Also less noise impacts than alternative 2 as well. More cars means more noise. And so with alternative 2 and that roadway connection, you end up with more noise. The con for this alternative is no vehicular connectivity across the railroad. So the residents still would not have a way to travel across the railroad other than a bicycle or pedestrian crossing. Alternative 2, which I just mentioned a lot in comparison to Alternative 1, this does provide that vehicular connectivity across 52nd Avenue. But there are a lot of cons with this as it relates to the residential neighborhood. There is less bicycle and pedestrian comfort than Alternative 1 because you do have higher volumes of cars and trucks and bike and pedestrians adjacent to those. Looking at more residential property impacts than Alternatives 1 or 3. Alternative 3 reroutes it takes the traffic north of the existing residential neighborhood. And Alternative 1 does not provide that vehicular connection across the railroad. So there would tend to be more residential property impacts here as well. There would also be more noise impacts from this alternative. Again, more cars, more noise, as I mentioned on the last one. And there would be more traffic through the neighborhood. Providing that connection provides people away from Brighton to get through the neighborhood, especially with trucks and all of that, to access some of the more regional highways. Alternative 3, this is the new road connection to the north. So this also does provide, as a pro, vehicular connectivity across the railroad. And it does have, while it provides that connection for cars and trucks, it has less noise impacts to the residential neighborhood than the 52nd connection alternative. So the cons, again, same as Alternative 2, it has less bicycle and pedestrian comfort than Alternative 1. It does have, that's one of the cons, it should be, that should be a pro, less residential property impacts than Alternative 2, but there still would be property impacts because you're putting a new roadway in. And there is more noise impacts than Alternative 1 as well, because you do have more vehicles traveling. And the last one, Alternative 4. So this is includes improvements to sidewalks and bicycle facilities, but does not provide any connection across the railroad. So the pros are, this has the least residential property impacts because you're not creating some sort of new connection across the railroads, and has the least noise impacts. You're not increasing any type of traffic, whether it's multimodal traffic or vehicular traffic onto 52nd Avenue. But the big con here, again, is there's no connectivity then across the railroad for this alternative. Andy, I will hand it back to you because I just covered an awful lot.
And again, let me try and sum up quickly sort of what Kara laid out there. When you look at those options, really option 1, I'll focus on the drawbacks. Option 1, less freight connectivity than you see with the other options, but generally sort of middle of the road to better than sort of other options as we look at it. When you look at options 2 and 3, those where we're seeing issues as it relates to property impacts, noise, environmental impacts, they also have higher costs associated with them. And then if you look at that 4th option, again, this is that new one that would come in that wouldn't have the pedestrian bridge. The issues you've got there is sort of lacking connectivity across as it's coming through, some questions about community support. I would note that evaluation was done with thinking of it as the ultimate solution. So again, that concept, I think, as we pointed out earlier, that could be a lower cost basis to begin sort of some of these other improvements as well. So yeah. Karen.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say one thing that I forgot to mention was really this evaluation was looking at what's feasible out there. And so all of these alternatives are feasible. It's just whether they can be phased or what will have the most impacts, and using that as kind of a starting point to move forward. So.
Perfect. So what we'd like to do is let's get into some more Q&A here, and we've got a poll here to get your take on sort of if you were to prioritize among the 4, what you would prioritize first. But before we go to that poll, why don't we jump into some questions and dialogue with you? We'd love to hear from you here. I know I'm seeing some conversations in the chat with regard to some of the sidewalks and things. If you'd like to hop on the line with us again, you can press the participants button on the bottom of your screen. That will open a window that sort of has everyone listed. On the bottom of that window is a raise hand button that if you press that, your hand will go up and we'll be able to call on you and get you into the line here. So let me give folks a chance to find that and press that button. And while we're waiting there, I know I see Gail LaRue and also Sandra. If either of you wanted to hop on the line, feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in here if you wanted to bring any of that conversation in for the broader group.
And Andy, I'm seeing a lot of conversation about sidewalks in the chat. I'd love for somebody to, I can try to address some of the questions, but if somebody wants to actually say it for the group, because not everyone may be looking at the chat.
So why don't we do this, Karen? Because I see Tracy Sakaguchi with hands up here. So why don't we pull Tracy on, and then if Sandra or Gail wants to jump on the line, we'll go with that. So Tracy, go for it.
Great, thank you, Andy. Tracy Sakaguchi, Colorado Motor Carriers Association. If we went with alternative one, the cross section that we saw previous, is that the considered cross section currently
So
for the alternative?
Tracy, that's a great question. And we're really at a high level here. We dove into cross sections before to get some baseline feedback as to the balance between uses, between pedestrians and cyclists and vehicular users, whether they be freight or cars or buses. But we're really at that high level feasibility. So we're not determining a cross section out of this. We're trying to determine what the community wants and where the alignment would be, and to have a couple alternatives for those cross sections. But we're not at a space of saying, oh, well, the lanes will be X feet wide and so on and so forth. We're just, we wanted to kind of roll it up to a higher level. So we're not determining a cross section here, more determining what's most important, whether it's important to have a bike facility on the street or a shared bike and pedestrian facility, or bikes on a different route parallel, or whatever the case may be. So that's the big picture. Does that help answer your
Yes,
question?
you. Thank you for the clarification on that.
And to be clear, should we move forward with any of these, you all need to be at the table, please. Because should we move forward with design of a bike ped bridge or design of the full connection, we'll be back. We don't go away. We don't want you to go away. This is for everyone to work on together collectively, because this is about providing for the existing community. This isn't for somebody moving in. This is for the folks that live there now.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Hi, this is Gail. So as a longtime resident of Globeville, we have people on the line who have lived here their entire life without sidewalks. This is a health crisis, not having sidewalks. It's extremely dangerous. And I just have a big, huge lump in my throat hearing all this. It's, to me, it's almost criminal to go forward with any of these plans without addressing the lack of sidewalks. I think I've spoke with you before, Karen, about one of the main roads to our school in the neighborhood has no sidewalks. So our kids are walking in the street each day along 44th Avenue. And yeah, I'm just,
Well,
I'm at a lack of words. I'm just disgusted that that our children have to walk in the streets, and yet we're talking, oh, well, let's look at this option, let's look at that option. It's just unacceptable.
I really I know this must be hard for you to say, and this is very emotional, and that's why we're here tonight. We don't have to look at any of these options. The outcome of this study can be, you know what, forget it. Forget all the over the railroad, focus on sidewalks. That's why we have option 4 in terms of looking at 52nd, but we're also going to dive into a little later in this presentation. We're going to dive into that question about sidewalks, because there is Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, GES bond funding for sidewalks that is working to address exactly the challenge that you've mentioned. And that's funding that exists now. Those are projects that are happening now. So we'll dive into that a little bit more, and I hope that you'll stick with us and share your feedback specifically to, we need a sidewalk here. And for this project, it's looking at the bubble that I mentioned before, but we can talk offline to get some more information on 44th. I know you had mentioned that before, and so that's something that we can work on a little bit more as well. And I really appreciate your comment.
Hi, this is Angela Garcia, and I just want to support Gail and what she said. I live next to 44th. I bought my home here 29 years ago, and we don't have sidewalks. The other thing I want to bring to your attention, because it's only 3 blocks away from where you're talking, is off of 50th and Washington, along where Project Angel Heart is. If you keep going down, there are residents there. There is no sidewalks whatsoever on off of 50th and Washington, going along to 49th and Pearl. No sidewalks in either one of those, and it's just horrible that they have to park in the mud. They have to get off their cars in their mud. Their babies have to get off of their cars in the mud, and so do the elders. And I know that the bond money is there, and you're telling us that sidewalks are being replaced. I don't see any sidewalks being replaced. I see some of them being ripped up to have something else done to it, and then those are put in. But I don't see anywhere else in Globeville where they're being replaced.
Yeah.
But like I said, I want to support Gail, and I'm also the one who also brought up the one about 44th. And like I said, I will talk about it until the day we actually get sidewalks in these places, and then I will go look for other places that don't have sidewalks. Thank you.
Good. That's exactly what we want you to do. That's important, and I really appreciate you saying that and calling us out and say, you said you were going to have sidewalks. We are working on Washington. Anthony Aragon is on this call, and he's leading some of the outreach and efforts around Washington. So I know he's taking notes on what you said about Washington and 50th, and we are working on those as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, here let's do this, because our next segment deals a lot with sidewalks. So what I'd like to do before we move to that is tie a bow on this discussion on sort of 52nd on its entirety. The next slide, Matt, if you can go to that, has a poll question for you, which we'd love, it'll pop up on your screen here. We'd love your feedback on. So let me go ahead and read it out as you're filling it out here. Which improvement would you like to see first in the long term? So when we think about these long-term options here, one would be the new bridge for bike and pedestrian only on 52nd Avenue. 2 would be sort of a new bridge for vehicles, bikes, and pedestrians. And then 3 would be the Brighton and York underpass. So as you think about sort of priorities among these long-term options, which of those jumps out to you as the highest priority?
And please keep in mind, we have a different question to focus on the short-term priorities. So that they're just 2 separate questions, but we're getting there too.
So Leah, I'm going to defer to you on the responses coming in to total up for us at the appropriate point.
We have about 1/3 that have voted, so hopefully all of you on the call can give us a quick response there so that we know what you're thinking.
Except me, I don't get to vote.
No?
For you.
The team will not vote. We'll leave that to the residents and stakeholders. people are thinking about it and votes are coming in, so. Okay, maybe a few more seconds. They're slowing down here. All right, let's end it. Drum roll.
Nice. So it looks like some of our responses, we've gotten three-way ties, but it looks like there's a strong interest in a bike ped only bridge over 52nd. So that's really, really helpful for us to get some clear feedback there.
Excellent. So here, let's pivot now. As we looked at the long-term sort of out in the future options that we're talking about here, we want to pivot and talk about things that can happen soon. Sort of the desire to see action in the community, so these improvements coming through. This is where a lot of those sidewalk options come in. So Karen, let me have you walk through some of those short-term ones.
Sure. So I had mentioned a bit about that we do have bond funding for sidewalks, and there's some there's the sidewalk improvement the sidewalk improvement program, the Swansea neighborhood park connectivity is some options there, and want to get some feedback from you as to sidewalk improvements in this area that are most important. So as I mentioned, we do have Elevate Denver bond funding for GES sidewalks specifically. There's sidewalk funding citywide, and then there is Globeville, Elyria, Swansea funding that focuses right in on this area. So while there are some small segments of 52nd that have currently been identified, if we hear from you that there are other areas that you want to focus on 52nd or within the neighborhood, we can help assess the feasibility of adding those. So I want to want to make sure that everyone knows that when we put a sidewalk in, that does include drainage improvements, curb, gutter, what have you. It's not just a sidewalk floating out there. If there's an area that doesn't have curb and gutter, we have to do the whole package. So it does make it a little bit more challenging. And we know there's some things along 52nd that do make sidewalks a bit more challenging. There's a sort of an old drainage ditch alongside the one side of 52nd for a couple blocks, but that doesn't mean it's not doable. It just means it's a little bit more involved. So with that, Matt, if you can pull up per our stakeholder group gave some really good feedback that folks wanted to dive in a little bit more detail as to where missing sidewalks are. So we put a little bit more detail here. We've got, hopefully you can see the screen. We've got little blue lines laid out in areas, and I'm zooming in on my screen, so that's why you're seeing my face a little close. But we have 48th, which is coming up soon for reconstruction, including new sidewalks, and we've got 52nd laid out. It's really only a couple blocks on 52nd. And then there are some other pieces that are identified, and then lots of red of missing sidewalks, as you are all intimately aware. So that's a little bit of the big picture. Obviously, we know there are some key destinations like access to the National Western Center N-Line station. That's what we're looking at from a sidewalk connectivity standpoint as destination. Obviously, the 47th Bridge, and there are the park, so on and so forth. So we want to really talk a little bit more about what you'd like to see, where where there are focus points that are key for folks to get to. And question from Councilwoman, is there a reason the GES is not shown in its entirety? And yes, it's because we're focusing in this project. And I know that's come up a couple times in the meeting. We're focusing in on this project area. We are hearing loud and clear there needs to be a larger conversation on sidewalks in the entire GES area. The scope of this project is a little more tightened down to that Brighton to Colorado and essentially city boundary to I-70. But it's clear to me that we need to have another conversation focused in on those bond sidewalks for GES as a whole. So that's something that we are working on. And let's see, there are a couple other questions. The percentage of sidewalk bond dollars that are just for this area. I don't have the percentage broken out from the bond program as a whole, but there is a separate line item from the overall sidewalk program that is just GES sidewalks. And I can, and they are for sidewalks in all of GES, not just this area. What I've been mentioning is I'd love to hear from folks in this area if there are specific opportunities to improve sidewalks in this area specifically that we can add into that package that might not have already been identified. So hopefully that is clear. And I had mentioned, big picture, that we wanted to get some feedback from folks as to what areas we wanted to focus in. And we just took a pretty simple cut of west of the railroad, east of the railroad, or between Vasquez and Colorado. So I know we want to have some opportunity for an open discussion. So hoping folks can provide some feedback in terms of these larger areas, and then we can focus in on maybe some specific areas. Does that work for you, Andy?
It does. I think that's a great idea.
Great. Okay. Andy's my timekeeper. I get in trouble if I talk too much without answering enough questions. So, Andy, I think you're gonna, do you want me to go over the question, or have I?
Here, you've talked enough. I'll jump in. Why not?
Excellent. Okay.
So again, you've got up on your screen the poll question here, and again, you see the areas in the graphic behind it. So again, between option 1 is between Brighton and the UP. Option 2 between the UP and Vasquez, and then option 3 between Vasquez and Colorado Boulevard. So, and again, the thinking here is if prioritization needs to come, which area is of greatest importance? And I do see sort of chat comments on, they're all important. Absolutely, there is no denying that. And I think there's no denying that, this individual area is just one part of the overall GES and sort of the greater needs within the broader community. I think what's helpful input for city staff at this point is if they can't do all of them, where would the highest and best use of dollars be spent within this particular area?
And Andy and all, I think we're trying to ask questions at a pretty high level, and people may have some much more detailed answers. And I would welcome you to either give me a holler, shoot me an email, whatever is most convenient for you if you have some very specific concerns and questions to answer, because it's like a three-way tie here. It's saying everywhere. So hear you loud and clear there. So in particular, if anyone has particular areas of concern, but we are looking at all areas. And I think this is a clear message that we really need to do a deeper dive and see how much more we can do. So that's something that we'll take to heart and work on. Okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. by myself. I'm still on top here. So one of the questions that came up on the side was that we need to assess sidewalk locations based on schools, parks, et cetera. And that is something that we did at a high level from an analytical standpoint with the sidewalk program as a whole. But sometimes those analytics, when they show up on paper, don't capture the additional information that community members have in terms of, well, yeah, that sidewalk is along the park, but nobody takes that way. People go this other way. So that's where we're looking for additional key feedback from folks in this meeting. So what you see in front of you is just some ideas about elements of improvements around the actual Swansea neighborhood park that could be helpful in terms of installing curb and gutter where it's missing. Folks know that along 52nd, the parking along the park edge is more informal pull-in. It's not paved, so that could be another option in terms of formalizing the parking, having more clear landscape areas and clear shelter for the bus stop there by the park, as well as lighting. So there are a number of different options that we can look at in terms of improving connectivity along the park edges there. So there's a lot there, and I'm just trying to keep my eye on chat. Is that
a lot of that sort of destination based, sort of go where the people are. Yep.
Yeah. So that's helpful, and that's something again that we look at a high level, but there may be destinations that don't pop up for us. We're looking at the key destinations of schools, parks, bus stops, but there might be, like, the corner store might be an important destination to make sure that folks have sidewalk connectivity and curb ramps and drainage and all that good stuff. So that is very, if anyone has additional details like that, please do help share that with us. And Andy, are there any other, I've been trying to.
Yeah, no, that I think we've covered that. I think this next step section actually gets to some of what the heart and the meat of what we've been talking about on sort of the near-term prioritizations. So I think if we can flip to that as it relates to this here, and then the poll on the next slide, and then we can open up again.
Great. So as we've been saying throughout the presentation, we're not looking at this as choosing alternative 1, 2, 3, 4 so much as this can be a phased implementation where some things like those sidewalk improvements that we've heard loud and clear are key and critical to the community members to get their kids to school, to get, nobody's mentioned the park, but to get to parks, to get to the rec center. That's really an immediate action item that happily we do have bond funding to help dive into that a little bit more deeply and actually be able to look at shorter term implementation. We also had, I think, some pretty clear feedback that what folks wanted to see next in line would be that bike ped only bridge. Like let's focus on that neighborhood connectivity. And again, we do have funding through the Elevate Denver bond for sidewalk improvements. We don't necessarily have funding for a new bike ped bridge, but that's something that I think I'm hearing loud and clear from folks that would be a next step, but focus in on sidewalks, focus in on all the gaps that exist now, then go to next steps. And it sounds like, at least from the feedback we've been getting throughout this meeting, and just to be clear, that longer term implementation would be improving that existing Brighton, York, Burlington Northern Santa Fe underpass, making that much more comfortable and safe, in particular for bikes and pedestrians, as well as freight and vehicular traffic. And then looking at something like a larger and more substantial connection, multimodal connection on 52nd is something that it sounds like is a bit less of a priority for folks, and whether it was or not is still a much longer term project and would have many additional phases for design to get feedback on a cross section and making sure we're accommodating all the users. So Andy, did I hit the highlights there for you?
I think so. I think so.
Great.
So again, this is looking at these improvements that can happen sooner rather than later. And let me take just a moment on these to make sure everybody's clear on sort of the options here. The first is additional neighborhood sidewalks. So sidewalks within the community. As a reminder, these would include curb, gutter, etc. So you would begin to address some of the drainage issues with that option. Option 2 for a near term would be bicycle accommodations within the neighborhood. So really balancing some of what we've heard earlier, sort of balancing moving around on foot versus moving around on 2 wheels. And then the third option is sort of more focused on the drainage issue with regard to curb and gutter in order to deal with some of those storm events, but not addressing any of the mobility issues. So again, if you want to take a moment to select from your screen, which one of those would you like to see as sort of the first step of the journey here? We'd love to see the feedback.
As you might guess, I'm seeing a pretty clear winner here.
I was wondering if we could take an over under.
Right? Looks like we'll give you just another few seconds if you haven't gotten your vote in yet. But people jumped right on this one, so I think we can end it and share that. Echoes what we've heard through the chat and other comments.
Excellent. So yeah, everyone I think can see that on their screens. 3 out of 4 of you, 76%, identifying the neighborhood sidewalks as sort of the top priority from the local community perspective. So here, I think now what we're really hoping to do, and I think this is one I'd love to sort of get everybody on the line verbally engaging with us. It's a bit challenging to say the least as far as sort of reading, responding, that sort of thing. So we've got about 15 more minutes here to unpack any of these conversations in any more detail. And again, sort of keeping focused on sort of the project area for this individual effort here. Again, if you press the participants button, that will open the little window that has participants in it. Raise hand is on the bottom of that window, and we can begin to get folks in for more dialogue with Karen as well as the project team.
Come on, somebody's got to have a question.
Very good. Councilwoman Sitabaca, thank you for hopping on here.
Of course, I will be the first one and probably the only one, but that's what they hired me to do. So just a quick question. I put it in the chat, but really wanted to get an understanding of why this is not included in the central network. I know we're talking about 52nd, but it's really cut out and on its own island with the whole neighborhood instead of being integrated in the places we're trying to go throughout the central network.
Sure. So I'm going to back up for 2 seconds and just mention that we have a community network program that's hitting the whole city. And right now we have the Northwest Community Network, Central Community Network, and we're attacking sounds bad. We are addressing network connectivity in different geographic bites, if you will. And it is not that GES is, and I hope folks are okay with me saying GES instead of, Central Community Network is one piece of the puzzle. Northwest is one piece of the puzzle. Globeville, Elyria, Swansea is another piece of the puzzle. And it's not that it's cut from the Central Community Networks, it's that it is its own community network and it is coming up. And I actually have texted one of my coworkers who is probably wisely not checking their text at 6:45 at night for a question to get a little bit more detail on the timing of this next community network. I don't recall it offhand, so don't quote me, please, but I think it's coming up in the next year or so. And that community networks study is fairly focused on bike connectivity, but also does include pedestrian connectivity considerations. It's not a vehicular study. It's really focused in on that bike connectivity and the pedestrian connectivity. So I think there's a couple ways to address some of the concerns there. One, yes, make sure that next community network piece is moving forward sooner than later, but also looking at our opportunity with what we have at hand with the bond sidewalk funding, and looking at how we can use that tool that is at hand and moving forward now to address some of the connectivity concerns and those network questions that folks are asking, both from a bike network standpoint and a pedestrian network standpoint.
And I was a little bit late to the call, but do we know why 52nd was identified as opposed to all of the other potential connections?
Sure. And you know what, we may not have covered that because, but let me go there, because that's a great question and that's the foundation of this. So this City of Denver, along with Adams County and Commerce City, conducted an industrial area study looking at how the three entities and work together to address some of the larger connectivity challenges in their shared industrial area. And 52nd was one of the top priorities out of that multi-jurisdictional study. So that's how we're here talking about 52nd, because this idea of 52nd connecting from Brighton to Colorado came out of that study. And before you start designing something, you have to figure out, well, is that feasible? Does the community want that? That was great at a big picture level where you're drawing a line on a map and saying, wow, this looks like this could be a great connection. But we want to come to the community and say, do you think this could be a great connection? Is this helpful to you? Are there other things that you'd like to concentrate on first? So originally this project was really just going to focus on the feasibility of 52nd. We said, that doesn't feel so good. Can we tie in some things that would actually be more beneficial to the community and get some feedback there? So let's tie in connectivity to the National Western Station, because now there's a station, there's a train station close to this neighborhood where there wasn't before. Can people get there? Is that easy? What can we do to facilitate that connection? And in that, I think also tied into that, at least in my mind, is better connectivity to the existing bus route in the community, whether there are other elements that, again, other destinations that are popping up. And then also that connection along the Brighton-York connection, that existing underpass, which I have gone on a bike and I don't recommend it. It's not real comfortable. It's not real comfortable on any mode of, whether any wheel or foot, whether you're in a car, whether you're on a bike, it's not a super comfortable. So we tied that in, but that's the reason we're focused on 52nd for this conversation, and why we're trying to tighten the conversation to that, but also identify we need to have another conversation about sidewalks and that larger connectivity. So I hope that helps answer your question as to why we're here about 52nd.
Yes, kind of. And I'm just curious about, have we figured out if we even have sufficient or appropriate connectivity to the other train station at 38th and Blake? We haven't even figured that one out yet. And so I hear you. I just wanted to know where it came from, because it does seem kind of like something that is probably the least identified by community as a place we should be investing. But just wanted to double check. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason for this. Like, if this isn't a priority for the community, let's stop it here and focus in on what is a priority for the community. That's exactly why we're here today, to hear what the community's priority is.
If it was
Priorities are, I should say, because it doesn't have to be one thing.
right, and it sounds like all of them are, but is this since it was catalyzed by a multi county stakeholder group or stakeholder input, was the plan to have it funded by a multi-county group?
That sure would be nice. I mean, we don't have funding. I don't know if you hopped on before or after Amber from the BNU, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, chatted about the idea of that underpass and potentially looking at multi-jurisdictional of funding and grant funding to help support that, the underpass in particular, because that is multi-jurisdictional. But there certainly could be opportunity for looking, you know, if we were to move forward with 52nd, for that to be multi-jurisdictional or something that is funded through our Regional Council of Governments with support from those adjacent jurisdictions. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for attending. We and asking great questions that I know not everyone is asking questions, but hopefully you know that you can go to the council office, they can get questions to me, you can come to me for questions, whether it is within the bubble we're talking about for 52nd or with anywhere in the council district. We email every day and talk.
So here, Karen, let me pull one more out of chat. I shot Alan a quick note to see if he wanted to come on for it or not. But while we're waiting, I think we've got time for this last one. And I think the question, as you see it there, he's honing in on Safer Main Streets grants through CDOT or Dr. Cog, Denver Regional Council of Governments. And I would maybe even broaden his question out. Sort of, what are the other creative funding mechanisms that you could tap in order to get more of these sidewalks in sooner?
Well, I mean, right now, I would say we have funding for sidewalks in GES. So funding isn't our biggest challenge right now. We will run out, you know, the bond will wrap up. We'll only be able to get so much done with the bond, but our challenge isn't funding. Our challenge is that a lot of places that don't have sidewalks because they're harder to put in there, because there's it's not just about putting a sidewalk in, it's about building a whole drainage infrastructure, building that curb and gutter. In some cases, you're having to lower the road so that you can put a curb and gutter. And we're trying to make these improvements without negatively impacting folks. It doesn't help if we're going to put a sidewalk in front of your house if we have to take your front yard so that you can have a sidewalk. That's not the goal. We're trying to build sidewalks so that you can use them. And that it takes time to really dive into those details. And what I'd love to hear from folks is, you know, do we want to focus on getting sidewalks on 52nd? Do we want those between the rail and the park? Is that a critical area? Because that's something I've asked my team, like, hey, can we look at that? I know it's a little messy. There's sort of a remnant drainage ditch. There's a lot going on there, but is that something folks want? Or are there other areas that are more important? I know 44th has come up in some areas that are outside of sort of this little bubble. So that's what I'd like to know, because we have some areas on 52nd that are identified for sidewalk improvements, but I want to know, is that the focus, or should we be looking more in where it's more solidly residential frontage instead of on the sides of residents? So just a lot of questions there. Sorry, more than answers.
Yeah. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
So we've discussed this when we were talking about the Fox area.
Mhm,
So that was what, over a year ago?
mhm.
And so what do we have to do to get things moving? You know, as we talked about earlier, it's dangerous for our kids, especially 44th. And I don't agree. Sometimes you can just build a sidewalk without the drainage. Even if it's temporary, at least they'll be out of the streets for now.
Mhm. We are working and moving forward with design on sidewalks and in 41st and Fox area, the team is still moving forward with design and construction. So we'll get you some updates on some of those conversations. They are coming soon.
And I think just to highlight, Karen, one of the persistent comments and concerns in GES, because we're this, I guess, corner of the city that is inundated with all types of transit through, transportation through, and not prioritization of getting people through. I think the last thing on our list of priorities is roadways to get cars through the neighborhood in a shortcut. This feels like it would be a very easy shortcut when I-70 is full to get off on Vasquez and come through toward downtown. It just feels like something that's not centered around the needs of the people. And so I'll just raise that because if we're going to do an east-west connection, there are other parts of the neighborhood that would be a better connection, or that we should make a connection, even if it's harder. But this one just feels like it would be more traffic and semis trying to avoid traffic on I-70 coming through the neighborhood.
And that's exactly that's what we want to hear. We want to hear what folks want. And if it's, one of the things that we heard in the first meeting, and John, I saw that your hand was up. One of the things we heard in the first meeting is one of the good things about our neighborhood is that there isn't a lot of traffic. And so there's that push-pull of, well, if we put a new connection through, you might be able to get over the rail, you would be able to get over the rail, but it would come with, as Kara talked about, more noise, more traffic, more potential conflict between users. So that's why we're here. If folks are saying, no, stop, no new connections, give us bike and ped, get us a bike ped bridge over the rail so we can make connections, get sidewalks on York, get sidewalks, on all the little missing pieces, get sidewalks on 52nd. That's a great answer. That's what we need to hear so that we can then prioritize that, some with, as much as possible with that existing bond funding, and then moving forward, finding, as Andy, I'm sorry, who asked the question about other funding?
Alan.
Yes, as Alan mentioned, Andy's the other half of my brain right now, looking for other funding sources, but we have funding right now. So that's the challenge.
If I could jump in here, I think what Karen's pointing out, and I would actually refine some of what you said, Karen, to make sure that we capture it in the meeting summaries the right way. What I think we heard loud and clear, and to me, there's planner speak of bike ped, right? That we always lump together bicycles and people on foot. And I think what we're hearing loud and clear is sort of micro investments within the neighborhood, helping the residents get in and around the neighborhood are of paramount importance. That those trump bike improvements.
Very much so. Thank you for saying that, Andy.
I think that's one. I mean, just that we want to make sure that we do capture accurately here. And so I appreciate everybody for all the feedback on that, because I think it's come through loud and clear, sort of where those priorities are. And I think to the councilwoman's point, sort of a broader look at overall GES, because obviously we sort of come into this study with the boundaries, And there may be greater, much more valuable needs sort of outside, but looking at it holistically so you get an entire neighborhood solution. So I just want to thank each of you for your participation tonight. Karen, let me flip it to you to walk through next steps.
Oh, that. Yes, thank you, Andy. So big picture, we've talked about this before. We want to refine and identify priorities and alternatives. I think we've gotten some great feedback tonight, and that will really help us in particular with that, identifying phasing of improvements, really focusing in on sidewalks, what we can't hit with bond, focusing in again on additional funding for additional sidewalks, and then tying in to John's point earlier in the meeting, making sure anything that we're doing, it's not just a line on a map. If we are doing a bike improvement, that it ties into the greater network. Obviously for pedestrian improvements, looking at some of those key destinations, the schools in particular, and rec centers, and then looking at providing funding estimates to make sure that we are lining up that funding strategically to make sure that we can build out that sidewalk network and that multimodal network. So that's a key factor. Heard a lot of great feedback. Certainly open to more feedback in terms of details as we're working through finalizing this feasibility study report. It will identify, the straight engineering, what's feasible, what's not feasible, what we've heard from you. It will highlight and focus on that need for sidewalk improvements, and really want to hear additional feedback from folks. As I said, you can reach out to me via email, via phone. It's coming up on the next slide or the slide after. And then we also really want to stay in touch with you. So if we move forward and with, say, pedestrian bridge, we want to make sure that your name is on this contact list so that we can get back to you and say, hey, got the sidewalks in, ready for the next step of that pedestrian bridge. Do you want to be involved? Do you want to talk about the design? So please do make sure that you are connected into our project list, and you can go to our webpage to submit comments. You can call me, you can write me. I don't sleep a lot, so you might get an email back at 3 a.m. Sorry. The project team loves
Not
me.
a truer statement has been spoken. Awesome. So again, thank you all. You see the details there. We appreciate you joining us tonight and taking an hour and a half out of your busy days. It means a lot, and we'll be keeping you posted here. So thanks again.